Hi guys, how you all doing? Good to have you back. So I have a video that we're reacting to, and it goes like this: the truth about where woke culture is taking society. Peterson, guys, let's check it.
What is causing this rush to that? Like, what? How did this happen, and how did this happen so quickly?
Well, this is partly tied up with this issue of the college. So here's one way into it. So now professionals are bound by law to offer gender-affirming advice. They're bound by law. Okay, so this is what this means. If you bring your 13-year-old in to be evaluated by a physician or a psychologist, and maybe she has high levels of neuroticism, tilting towards depression and anxiety, and then that's making itself manifest in bodily discomfort, now that's being shaped by this cultural fad that insists that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, it's because you're of the opposite gender. That's the psychological epidemic part of it. And we can talk about that in a little bit more detail. But now you're duty bound by law, if you're a professional, to say, oh, you think you're a boy? Yeah, absolutely. You absolutely, 100%, you are. What can we do to facilitate that move forward? And that all got, what would you call, pushed into the law under the guise of the elimination of conversion therapy. So, unbelievable. Now, the problem with that is, you see, if you're a therapist or a physician, you don't affirm someone's identity. That's not your job. And your job is not to deny their identity either. Your job is to help them explore their identity and hopefully to develop it. And so someone comes to you, maybe they have body dysmorphia. And so maybe they're anorexic. That's a form of body dysmorphia. And so the first thing you do, if you have any sense, is you note that that's stemming out of an underlying, more global proclivity to suffer from depression and anxiety. So that's the big elephant in the room, depression and anxiety. So if the trans activist types say, well, the body dysmorphic types are more likely to have suicidal thoughts, it's not because they have body dysmorphia, it's because they're prone to depression and anxiety, and depressed and anxious people are more likely to have suicidal thoughts. And maybe body dysmorphia adds a bit to that, but nobody really knows. Probably adds some. But the fundamental issue is one of depression and anxiety. So now you're suffering from, unspecified self-consciousness, and the culture twists around to offer you a narrative. And the narrative is, oh, well, you're in the wrong body. And then the carrot is, and this is part of it gets extraordinarily pathological, is a lot of these kids who are suffering from this alienation are unpopular. And now they're being enticed. It's like, yeah, well, you're not unpopular. You're interestingly special. So if you just take this carrot, you're the opposite sex, all of a sudden you're not a victim, you're a brave, you're a brave seeker after your redemptive identity. And now you can be elevated and you can be treated specially. And my God, if you're an unpopular teenager, how could anything be possibly more attractive than that? And then you also think, well, why are teenagers gullible in that way? Why do they go along with the crowd? And the answer to that is, that's what you're supposed to do when you're a teenager. That's your job, right? Because first of all, you're with your parents, and you're not yet a fully fledged individual. So what you have to do is you have to become part of the group. And if you're not part of the group, well, maybe you're a stellar, creative genius and you're exceptional in that manner, but more likely you're just a loser who couldn't fit in. And that sucks. That's for sure. So your job when you're a teenager is to fit in, as every teenager knows, and maybe not just to fit in, but, to fit in a positive way that elevates the community. But we could just settle for fitting in. And so teenagers are wired to go along with the crowd. And then if the crowd is offering something pathological, that happens all the time, you get a psychological epidemic. And I knew that. I told you. I told the Senate this in 2017. And why did I know? Well, I knew the literature. We've tracked psychological epidemics going back 300 years. 300 years. Here's some of them. Multiple personality disorder. It cycles in society. Disappears, then there's one case, then it spreads like mad. Then there's multiple personality disorder everywhere. Teenage girls mostly. Then people get skeptical about it, and it dies. And maybe it disappears for a whole generation or two. Then a case pops up. just does this. That's happened for 300 years. Cutting was a psychological epidemic. Bulimia was a psychological epidemic. Anorexia was a psychological epidemic. The satanic daycare ritual abuse accusations that came out in the 1980s, that was a psychological epidemic. And the rule basically is that if you confuse people about a fundamental element of their identity, then those who are already so confused they're barely hanging on are going to fall prey to that, and all hell's going to break loose. And that's exactly what's happened in the trans situation.
But the
It's
difference
just
between
unbelievable.
this one as opposed to the other ones like multiple personality disorder is that this one is being reinforced culturally. Like you are rewarded.
Yeah, well, the multiple personality disorder, that happened there too, because you'd get a lot of attention from media, especially the people who are the first, who display the first symptoms of multiple personality disorder. You get a psychologist or a psychiatrist or an alienist, if you go back far enough, who reports this fascinating case of multiple personality. And, there are people who are dissociative. So they kind of have multiple personalities. They're united by memory. They're usually creative people, because creative people have multiple personalities. That's what makes them creative. They're not the same from day to day. You could even say they have fluid identities. And so the claims of the gender types that some people have fluid identities, it's like, yeah, creative people do. They're the purple-haired types with like nose rings and tattoos. That's all part of trait openness. You combine that with high neuroticism, negative emotion, then you get people who are fluid in their identity, who are also prone to depression and anxiety. So that's also crystal clear. And so, look, if you're an outsider, will you want to be a dull and contemptible outsider? Or do you want to be an interesting and compelling and nouveau, exciting outsider? Well, if you're a teenage girl and you've been unpopular, that's brutal, eh? Because, you get tied up with those mean girls.
Yeah.
They shun you and exclude you. It's absolutely brutal. You're just living a peripheral existence. You got no friends. Everyone's contemptuous of you. And maybe that's partly because you have something that marks you out from the norm, like a tilt towards autism, because a lot of the people, it was just released with the Tavistock staff. The Tavistock closed down in the UK. That was the big gender surgery performing institute in the UK.
How is that closed down? What happened?
Government closed it down.
So
Yeah, because they knew that they figured out in the UK that, wow, the rates of transgender transformation requests were skyrocketing. And even the people at the clinic knew that they were rushing people along the transformation pipeline way faster than they should have without proper clinical evaluation. There's 1,000 lawsuits out against the Tavistock in the UK now. Wow. 1,000.
So much in one video. What a man. Pressure is high. So you have to look for a way to navigate life. When you're going through hard time, you just have to have something you hold on to that you get through. See, life is hard. Don't make it complicated for the next person. I don't know what people would do, from bullying others, bullying teenagers. I don't understand. Life is hard already. Why make it harder for them? See, guys, stay true to who you are. What's the point of changing who you are? Stay true to who you are. With time, everything will be okay. Hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did. Please switch yourself. See you on the next one. Bye bye.